Oh boy, here he comes again with another video calling something else the greatest or the best. Listen, look, I could either do this or go back to who I was 2 years ago when I hated on things for nitpicky reasons, alright? I don't like that guy either, so let's stick to this. If you were to ask me who I think is the best main character to come out of the shonen demographic, I think there are plenty of people that are fair answers. I know some would say Edward Elric or Gintoki. I personally can't vouch for them because I'm yet to finish those series. Others would argue Naruto or characters. Most likely, the popular picks would be Luffy and Eren, but for me personally, I would go with Alan Walker. Now, if you don't know who this is or what series he's from, then I hate you and you're a freak. Now, this is Alan Walker from D.Gray-Man, a shonen series that came out back in the 2000s amongst that sort of golden era of shonen, if you will, and I think that D.Gray-Man is a story that anyone should check out because of the setting, because of the overall story and theme that it has, the great cast of characters, and above all, its main character. Now, before we get into any of that, however, I've noticed that over 70% of you that watch this channel haven't subscribed. So if you've been watching me for a while, if you subscribe and turn on the bell notifications, that would be greatly appreciated. As well as thank you to Figurama Collectors for sponsoring today's video. With pre-orders opening on July 1st at 11 p.m. JST, they're bringing to you an exclusive Devilman Serene Elite exclusive statue. As always, it's extremely high quality like all their other statues, including 2 portraits for the character. It's the world's first 1/4 scale of the character Serene from Devilman, and it's actually a sequel piece to their previous Devilman vs. Amon statue. You can save $45 off of shipping with Amazon payment, as well as an extra $30 discount using code TMSES. So if you are interested, make sure you go down the link in the description below, and go quickly because these statues tend to sell out within the first day, sometimes within the first hour. So once again, thank you to Figurama Collectors for sponsoring today's video. On top of being a massive sellout, I also seem to be a massive fan of series that happen to go on hiatus. I think a lot of talk that you'll see now about D.Gray-Man and its recent arc is due to the fact that it can be a little bit confusing, but I think that's really elements of the mystery of the story, it going many different places, as well as the fact that, again, due to hiatus, we've gotten updates so infrequently that I would recommend anyone to go back and visit those chapters. I say this because despite that, in some of the more recent chapters we've gotten to see the backstory to Alan Walker. Yep, 200 chapters later, we finally get the tragic backstory to our main character. And that's because Alan, and the way that his character is presented throughout the story, isn't really typical, I would say. There's elements of it that I've seen before, but the way that it all comes together is really something that allows D.Gray-Man and Alan Walker's story to stand out. From the beginning of the story, Alan is presented to us as an extremely kind-hearted, compassionate, as well as well-mannered individual, and wishes to even save those that he's meant to exorcise. Alan Walker is an exorcist, part of this organization, which is meant to, well, exorcise these things known as Akuma, and yet in his nature in doing so, he isn't some sort of ruthless killer hunting these things down, but if not, he is a kind-hearted individual who sees the despair and the pain that brought these people to converting into that state. At first in the story, you don't really pay too much attention other than the fact that these are the current powers that he has. The eye that allows him to see the souls of these Akuma, and his arm which is composed of innocence, which essentially allows his arm to be a weapon to destroy Akuma. This is important as Alan Walker seems to have these different pieces on him, and you don't really think much of it because you think of it to be the standard power that he has, but yet there's so much more behind this as the story continues onwards. D.Gray-Man overall as a story takes, I'd say, about 40 to 50 chapters to really pick up and get you extremely invested in the characters, but it's throughout that you sort of get this sense of who Alan is. As I said earlier, he comes off as very polite, almost gentleman-like, but yet as the story continues further and further, we learn more and more about his character and who he truly is. His politeness, his smile, all of that gentle kindness, while it is genuine in the sense that he pities the Akuma for the state that they are in, and the way that he deals with other people, it's rather a facade, if you will. Due to his origins and where he comes from, Alan is actually quite quick on his feet, in the sense that he's able to adapt to any situation that he finds himself in, choosing to be rather more kind and courteous when convenient, but deep down he really has these giant sentiments of lament and sadness and almost unstableness when push comes to shove. I recently did a video on Gabimaru from Hell's Paradise, and I love how his character, so much of it is given to us at the very beginning, and then it's further expanded upon from there, and allows for a lot of the other cast members to be expanded upon as well. But with Alan Walker, what I think what makes his character really great, and all of these little intricacies with his personality, and really all of the different emotions you get to see really well fleshed out with him at different points, is the fact that the story naturally develops this over time. The more that he learns about the Akuma, the more that he learns about the Noah and the Millennium Earl, and the more that he learns about his own organization even. And you see, early on within the story, I think Alan sort of finds a bit of a home for himself finally, given everything that he had gone through to his life up to that point. And what we end up seeing later as tensions start to rise, there is that brief period within the early segments of the story where he creates these comrades, these friendships, these bonds that allow him to sort of feel like he belongs. But as things become more and more intense, Alan once again realizes that he's sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place. There's these two sides, and he doesn't really fully belong in either of them. Because despite being in an organization which is meant to exercise and get rid of these Akuma, his desire, due to the pity that he has for them, is to save them as well. Save the exorcists, as well as save the Akuma. And not just with the Akuma, but he does this as far as extend with the Noah as well. We see this with Tiki, where Alan doesn't even go to kill him, despite pretty much having every right to do so at the moment. Alan Walker is more of a savior before he is an exorcist, and this isn't entirely a unique thing, as we see many merciful protagonists, but the way that the story naturally presents it, given the circumstances Alan finds himself in, and later on we figure out the circumstances that came before all of this, it makes his reasonings for being compassionate believable. He can see their pain, he can see their despair, he's seen this sort of thing before, and it's not just him being merciful for the sake of doing so. I brought up earlier the fact that with Alan at the beginning of the story, we see he has these pieces to him, his arm which is made of innocence and his eye which is cursed and allows him to see the souls of Akuma. Alan Walker is this amalgamation of different things, and that goes far beyond just his powers, but his own memories and who he is himself, being a vessel for the 14th Noah, which is revealed at a certain point within the story, and it's there where we really get to see this struggle with Alan Walker that goes even further. Who he really is, whether his memories have any sort of validation, whether he will lose himself to the 14th, or whether he was really his own person in the first place. Whenever you think you kind of have Alan figured out, once you think you could put him in this box based off of what you've read and seen before, the story does an amazing job of throwing in these amazing twists that it's been building the entire time, but you sort of get lost that they were there given all of the different things happening within the story. Because if you were to look at Alan Walker within the first 100 chapters of the story, and then the next 100 chapters of the story, and then you were to take Alan Walker and his backstory, and at certain points they could feel like three near completely different characters, outside of obviously we knowing that it's the same character, but in terms of personality and behavior, and it's seeing how this character has grown and changed, and how the story develops this character so naturally is amazing. And I think we get to see so many of these different facets of his personality and the struggle he goes through, given other great characters within the story that allow him to shine through and through. Kanda being one of the prime examples as well, his mentor Cross, and last but not least Mana himself. And then you add on top of all of this, as we see Alan's character throughout the story, then we find his childhood, where he met Mana as a sort of a worker within the circus act, cleaning all of the equipment and the tools, constantly being mistreated. And I think it's through those years of his childhood and later on where we really get to see this sense of loneliness in Alan Walker that is throughout the entire story. I talked about this lament and this sadness, but I think that really comes from a place of loneliness, never really belonging anywhere, being an orphan and now finding himself within two sides that he can't fully be a part of, and he finds himself in the middle of. And you look into his backstory and you could see this boy who is far different from the Alan we know now. This is an Alan Walker that's incredibly rude. He doesn't even have the name Alan yet. That name is given to him by Mana. And seeing how Alan was is almost night and day. Is kind of when you find out Kakashi's backstory, you see how cool and calm and collected and wise he is, but then you look at him as a kid and he's brash, he's arrogant, he's crude, and I think a lot of those qualities could be said for a young Alan Walker, who I think there's a specific moment where Mana's dog and Alan first interact, and I think with that, as well as how Mana is, you can see that Alan doesn't fully understand emotions, even though obviously he's a kid. It's in the sense that because of the treatment he's been given, it's almost like he doesn't really know how to accept kindness. But once he finally does with Mana, you get to see sort of that more gentle side of him peer out. You could see that aspect of Alan that is genuine and does care for others, as he was able to care for a dog and the person who owned the dog, and he had barely even known them. And so you see these qualities carry on into Alan Walker later in his life, but I think all the experiences he would end up going through and the horrible tragedy that would happen with him and Mana, that it would create this sort of very strong independence with Alan Walker, where yes, he feels the need to save everyone he can, but he goes about it in a very independent manner where, again, that sense of loneliness comes through and through. In those earlier aspects of the story, I spoke about how we could see Alan Walker's happiness and how that sort of ends up becoming a facade, and that's because Alan Walker, in a very strong sense, needs to protect himself. He feels like he needs to handle all of this alone, and why wouldn't he feel that way given all the circumstances he's gone through? When you find yourself in a unique position and you're so used to always having to contend with things on your own, why would you ever want to burden others or rely on others for such things? But it's learning to accept others' help that is a part of Alan's growth throughout the story. And the only people he really had as sort of these fathers in his life, Mana and then Cross, would both end up not being there for him, at least not in the same way as they once had. And I think there's a very important quote with the character of Alan Walker, because despite how dim and tragic it might all sound, there is this sort of hope you feel with this character, this ability to keep moving forward. And it's a quote that he gets from his mentor Cross, where it says, quote, "A path is something you create as you walk it. The ground you trod in hardens, and that's what forms your path. You're the only one who can create your own path. Walk on your own. If you haven't given up yet, that is." No matter what pieces make up Alan Walker, no matter what lies in front of him, no matter what the bigger picture is, it doesn't matter. Because for Alan Walker, he will continue to be himself, whatever that means, as long as he keeps moving forward and keeps walking his own path.